Senator Nelson and I will now ask some questions. And let me start with a general question to the three of you. Flying into Florida, hearing this debate, I would draw one of two conclusions. Either, as Mr. Smathers just said, there's a political agenda here. Somebody's trying to keep certain people from voting or make it harder for them to vote. Or another conclusion. There's terrible voter fraud in Florida. Something had to be done to the laws. So, Supervisor McFall, what has been your experience when it comes to voter fraud in your jurisdiction or others, and whether it's addressed anything that you've seen with this new law?
Well, Senator, it is not because of voter fraud, because voter fraud is not out there. After the 2000 election, and I served on the canvassing board of the Bush 4 recount in Volusia County as a commissioner. After that election, Florida, the state of Florida, implemented the Florida voter registration system. That is catching a whole lot of duplicates. For instance, moving from Seminole to Volusia, I fill out a new application. That will automatically catch it. That application also has the last four digits of your social on there or your driver's license number. That has to be matched before that voter is activated as an eligible voter. There is not fraud in the voter registration process. And personally, I don't care who hands in applications. If the applications are valid, it will show. If it isn't valid, then they will be caught as well. And we have a great relationship with our state's attorney. So it isn't fraud.
Do either of the other two witnesses disagree? Well, then let me ask this question of you, Supervisor Urtel. You have said, and I quote you, "We are in the opportunity business." Reducing the number of days for early voting, does that increase opportunity or decrease opportunity?
It depends on how you look at it.
Please.
Pause for laughter. It depends on how you look at it, because the new early voting laws, the old early voting laws, by the way, had 96 hours of early voting. The new early voting laws allow each supervisor the discretion of having up to 96 hours of early voting. Which by the way, and if we do I first registered to vote in 1987 for the 1988 elections. It makes me 42 if anyone's doing their math. When I first voted, there was no early voting. In 1992, when President Clinton was elected, there was no early voting. In 96, when he was reelected, there was no early voting. And we go down the entire process there. So early voting is a new phenomenon. Absentee voting, the increase in absentee voting is also something that is new over the past several decades, where folks have excuse-free absentee voting. So, back when I first registered to vote, and years and years before that, and as you mentioned, you used to have to have an excuse to vote absentee. You have to promise I'm going to be at the doctor's office.
So, is it your conclusion then that these changes in absentee voting and early voting have created more opportunity until this new law?
They created a longer time frame in which people can cast their ballots. So, for instance, when if you take a look back years and years and years ago, there was 12 hours to vote. 12 hours to vote. Now we have 96 plus 12 hours to vote. People used to always complain about why is voting only on Tuesdays. Well, voting isn't only on Tuesdays. Voting is on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, a couple days off, and again on Tuesday.
But not Sunday. Let me ask you this question.
Well, actually, Senator, I don't believe that, I don't know if, in fact, I did some research, and of all of the panel, of all of the senators on the committee, and I'm saying this with full respect, I don't believe that any of the states of any of the senators on this committee have Sunday early voting the day before the election.
We have early voting in Illinois. We have not restricted it. We've expanded it, and I'm behind expanding it even more. I think we should give people as much time to
I don't think it's on Sunday.
Let me ask you this question. In terms of Seminole County, you have some discretion under this new law about how long you'll be during that early voting period. What are you going to do?
In November?
So will you commit to opening early voting locations at the maximum number of locations in Seminole County and keeping them open and available to voters for the maximum number of days, 8 days, 96 hours, as allowed under the new law?
Absolutely. In the November election, we're going to.
Good.
In this election, we do not have those 12 full hours of early voting. We have from 10 to 6.
Can I
but
go?
in the November election, we absolutely will. And if I can add one more thing about early voting. Thank you, sir. in years past, we were one of the only counties in the state that had early voting on the Sunday before the election. We saw a higher turnout. Again, not because it was on Sunday, but because it was the final day of early voting. As people are realizing this, as the campaigns are coming to its conclusion, folks are realizing this is my last chance to go to the poll early.
Let me ask you about the overture that you made to the League of Women Voters when they said they were going to cancel registration. That was a noble gesture on your part. And did you make the same overture to other organizations that had historically been engaged in voter registration, nonpartisan voter registration?
Not only did I make it personally, I put out a news release and said, don't cancel your registration drive. We will go there, and we have done it for the past year in places, and folks have called us on the offer. They said, absolutely, we'd love for you to do that and come and do the voter registration drive for us.
That wasn't required by law, though, was it?
I wish that all supervisors in the state would do that, and I think they will. I really do, because, I mean, I know every single supervisor of elections in the state of Florida, and I know that they're all very dedicated to the process.
Was that required by law? That was my question.
No, I mean, it's also not required by law for a supervisor of elections to show up to work every single day, but we do, because we're dedicated and we love the process.
So the point I'm trying to get to is when we're talking about protecting people's rights, and we want some guarantee of consistency and uniformity, your overture to the League of Women Voters, as noble as it was, is not required of every supervisor of elections. Is that true?
Me writing the League of Women Voters and offering that was not because of formal law. It's because of my dedication to the process.
That's my point. I thank you for that very much. Let me turn over the question to my colleague, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. McFall, you noted that there was no consultation between the Florida legislature and the supervisors of elections on the changes to the voting laws. And I'm quoting from your testimony, it was almost as if the deal was done, end of quote. This has been reiterated in the press by other supervisors of elections and has been reiterated in other statements submitted for the record. So no one reached out to you in getting your opinion when this legislation was being considered?
No one, not even the Volusia delegation, which I have a great relationship with. That's one of the first times I've not heard from anyone.
It's my understanding that on early voting, which as I noted in my earlier comments, because of the horrible experience that we had in 2000, that in order to make it easier to vote, early voting was enacted and made it easier for seniors, for single moms. You go down the list, for people who are renters, for people who have to work long hours, sometimes 2 jobs to make ends meet, and they could then have a day where they could find it convenient to go and vote. And it's my understanding that the old law allowed 96 hours of early voting. Am I correct that this new law, under the discretion of the individual supervisor of election, can cut that down to 48 hours, 1/2?
Yes, yes. The minimum allowed is 6 hours per day.
You talked about in your statement the impact of the law on the actual administration of elections. How much do you expect to spend beyond what you normally spend in order to comply with this new law?
I'm either going to have to pretty much double my early voting staff, or again, as I mentioned earlier, pay the overtime. Right now, I have 5 sites, 1 in each county commission district. Each site costs about $15,000 to keep open, keep open and close. At my office, it's a little less. So I'm guessing that's going to probably get up to about the $25,000 range per site per election.
You had written a guest column for one of the newspapers last year when this thing started happening in in the press about the Volusia County high school teacher. And you said you saw the new law as so egregious that you felt you had to bring it to the attention of interested citizens. And that's not easy for you. You're going against your particular preference of a political party. What aspects did you find the most egregious?
Well, the most egregious I found was, it was done in the name of voter fraud, but I found that I was turning down Republican club presidents. I couldn't give them applications. Democratic club presidents, I was turning down the NAACP. I was coming in to get applications. They had to be registered as a third party in order to receive these applications. Then if they went and registered as a third party, came back, then I had to spend 2 days, my staff, putting their number on the back of the application. I mean, this is somewhat demeaning to people I've known for 30 years, that we had to resort to sitting in a little room putting numbers on the back of applications. Had to be their number. And then they had to come back in and see me in my registration division when they had their applications to make sure they got them in within 48 hours. And then the coup de grace is I have to turn them in because they didn't comply. That's what's so heartfelt about this. And you know these people, they're your constituents, they're good people, and you had to turn them in.
And on the previous question, if my mathematics is correct, you're talking about in per election, it's at least going to cost you $50,000 more.
I would say easy.
In your testimony, you also suggest that the Division of Elections is going to receive double the amount of provisional ballots because of this new law. Based on your experience, what are the key factors that lead you to believe that the number will be so high?
Well, I mentioned earlier that Volusia County has the 5 universities in the county. The most active campus is Bethune-Cookman. They literally have a march, a festival on campus on a certain day during early voting, and they march the 2.5 miles to early voting in a block. 2,000 to 3,000 young people are marching to go vote. 70% of those kids have something wrong with their voter registration. Maybe they moved from one dorm to the next, something like that. So you could see where it's going to be even worse, because if it's an out-of-state, if someone moves from Broward to Volusia, that's now going to be a provisional ballot. We're planning on doubling our provisionals because of this.
You testified that fraud is not a legitimate reason for changing the law. And I'm curious, it seems like that Florida was very progressive in having a Florida voter registration database that is available to the public. Tell us about this database and how that helps you as a supervisor avoid fraud.
On election day or early voting or anytime, anywhere else, I can pull up FVRS, Florida Voter Registration System, as can Mr. Ertel, and see who's registered anywhere in the state. Anywhere in the state. So if someone moved from Miami-Dade to Volusia,